to this presentation, and thank you all for your interest and for joining us today. It's really great to have you all. Okay, so today's topics, first we're going to briefly go over some information about the Zoom platform, just to help you get the most out of this presentation. And we've modeled these slides after the web version, so the desktop app might look a little different, but the icons should be the same. And then we'll talk about general preparedness. Okay, so just a couple tips. If everyone has their cameras on, it can create some lag. So if you can, it's great to have your camera off. And we'll have some sections for questions. So it would be great if you could keep your microphone muted while we're not doing questions, just to minimize distractions and background noise. You can change your microphone, video, and speaker settings using this up button. Okay, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the chat box because today we're going to be using it to interact. You can open the chat box by clicking the chat button in the bottom middle, and you can ask questions and interact with Kimberly, who is our host, at any time during the presentation. So you can go ahead and stay muted, but type your questions into the chat so that you don't forget them. Okay, so let's test the chat really quick. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how prepared were you for your last emergency? For me, that was the Silverado fire, where we started preparing to potentially evacuate, and I felt like I was at about a 5 during that.
We have a 3.
Okay.
I'd put myself probably at about a 5 as well. Maybe a 4. I feel like there's a lot that I could do in my house to get ready.
Yeah, there's always something.
And I don't see any more answers coming in. Oh, here's a 6. We have a 6.
Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer to this. We just wanted to see where you were with preparedness. And hopefully, if you're feeling like you're in the lower, like below 5, we can get you feeling a little more prepared today. So now we're going to go into the main part of this presentation, which is general disaster and emergency preparedness. So today we're going to learn about disaster preparedness. So basically, a disaster or an emergency is something that can affect your daily life, and it can happen at any time, sometimes without any warning. So there are a lot of things you can do to be prepared, to respond safely, and to speed your recovery after a disaster. And this presentation is designed to give you some practical tips about how to plan and prepare for your needs during a disaster or emergency. And since no two people are the same, we're going to help you assess your abilities and potential conditions you may need to consider in the event of a disaster. You'll also be provided with the key actions and steps to take before, during, and after a disaster or emergency. So there will be specific actions that we're going to discuss today for before, during, and after a disaster or emergency. So we'll get started with that. Okay, so let's begin by discussing the major actions you can take now to prepare for a disaster or an emergency, and we'll go more into detail with each of these in the upcoming slides. So the first thing is to get informed. This would be learning about your area, the most likely emergencies that could happen there, and also the resources that are available to you. You can also assess your needs, so consider your individual needs, assess what resources are immediately available to you, and what you might need in the event of an emergency. You can build your support network by identifying helpers in your life and discuss a plan with them. You can develop your plan, so think through what you would do if an emergency occurs by evacuating or sheltering in place, and how to protect yourself and your property in each instance. You can also create a communication plan. So once you've built your support network, you can make sure that everyone knows your plans and how to be contacted, and also how to contact you in the event of an emergency. You can gather the supplies you'll need. So assemble an emergency kit with general and personalized items for you and everyone in your household. And also prepare the documents you'll need so you can locate, gather, and copy all important personal and medical documents and keep them somewhere safe. So we're going to go over some of these actions in more detail. Let's first discuss how you can become more informed. So first, you can identify likely emergencies, which would be learning about the types of disasters or emergencies that could happen in your community. So here in Southern California, we encounter earthquakes and wildfires frequently, as well as heat and flooding. And of course, home fires are a type of emergency that can happen anywhere and to anyone. So they should also be a consideration when you're identifying emergencies that could happen to you. It's also important to learn about your community and housing response plans. So you can find out about your community's guidance response plans, evacuation routes, and all available resources for preparing and responding to disasters. If you live in housing such as an apartment building or maybe assisted living, you can find out about your management's guidance and plans to prepare and respond to disasters or emergencies. It's always good to ask. You can also sign up for alerts and warnings. So counties often have alert systems, and it's good to check your county's website to sign up for local alerts. There are also some national alerts. It's also important to understand the meaning of a watch versus a warning and other information that's contained in these alerts and the actions you'll take for disasters that are likely in this area. So just a quick overview of that. A watch typically means that expected weather is going to occur, and a warning typically indicates that the disaster conditions are already occurring. It's also good to get trained. So learning first aid and CPR are really useful for emergencies. And for most disasters, there are specific actions that you can take to help protect yourself once you've learned about the disasters that you might encounter in your area. So for example, the guidance for an earthquake is to drop cover and hold on to protect yourself from falling or from debris. And addition to the basic guidance, there might be alternate actions. If you're in bed, you stay in bed and cover yourself. Or if you're in a wheelchair, you lock yourself and cover to protect from debris. The Red Cross website, which I will link you to at the very end of this presentation, is a great resource for disaster-specific information. And next, we'll talk about how to assess your needs. So here are some of the ways you can assess your needs. You can understand how medical, physical, and cognitive needs might affect your ability to respond to a disaster or an emergency. So before an emergency happens, you can think about how you would respond. Especially consider needs if the power went out, or if you had to stay home for 2 weeks or more, or if you have to quickly evacuate your home or community. Part of this would be taking an inventory of items like assistive devices that you rely on at home that you would need to take with you if you were evacuated. And when you're compiling this information, make sure to write down model information. So part of this list would be items that require electricity. This might include refrigerated medications, CPAP devices, or a power wheelchair. Make a list of all these devices to take with you in an evacuation, and you can consider lightweight or portable alternatives where possible. And also plan for battery or generator backup for all items and where you'll go if these power sources won't last for an extended power outage. Next, we'll discuss how you can build your support network. So part of your support network, it contains all of the people that can help you during and after an emergency. This would include family members, caretakers, neighbors, and other loved ones who can help you. You typically want people that live close by as well as out of town contacts in your circle of support. So you would identify helpers, so that would include family, friends, neighbors, caregivers, and care providers to help build your network and help you develop and support your plan. You might want to meet with your helpers to plan together. So you'll talk about what kind of help you'll need during specific emergencies and different types of emergencies and how specifically they can assist you. You might also be able to help others too, so that's another consideration. And you also want to make a contact information for all these helpers, a list of all your helpers and their information, and plan ahead how you'll communicate regularly and during a disaster, especially when communications might be disrupted. Okay, so you can use the chat for this little pop quiz. So, which of the following is not a frequently occurring hazard in Southern California? And our options are earthquake, flood, tsunami, landslide, or heat. And you can go ahead and put your answers in the chat.
We have one answer for tsunami. 3 answers for tsunami.
Okay, you all are very with it today. Okay, so that is correct. A tsunami is not a commonly occurring disaster in California. It can happen, and if you live in an area where you're near the coast, that might be something to consider, but it's not a frequently occurring hazard for Southern California. Good answers. Okay, so now let's discuss how you can develop your plan for disasters and emergencies. So it's important to consider all potential disasters in your area that could affect you. I mentioned earthquakes, wildfires, and home fires earlier, but that could include other natural disasters like tsunamis or even power outages. So you'll need to plan the actions that you'll take for each. Okay, here's some more ways to develop your plan, kind of building off of what we just talked about. So it's specifically important to assess your power needs. So if you require power to operate medical devices or keep medicines cold, you should talk with your care providers and your utility company to make a backup power plan. It's also important to learn how to turn off the water, gas, and electricity supply to your home. However, in some cases, if your gas is turned off, only a gas utility professional can turn it back on. It's also really important, we talk about natural disasters a lot, but home fires are a type of emergency that can happen anywhere. So it's good to be prepared for them. Make sure you have smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors on every floor of your home, inside of bedrooms and outside of each sleeping area. Part of home fire preparation is bringing up an escape plan. So know 2 ways out of every room and think about the assistance you might need to evacuate safely during a home fire. Some more ways to develop your plan are to know your property or renter's insurance and make sure that you have disaster specific coverage for your area and that the amount of coverage is enough for you. So typically homeowner insurance does not cover flooding or earthquakes, and these disasters might require separate policies and some research. However, you may be able to strengthen your home and create protection against some disasters like floods or earthquakes, but this would involve consulting a trained professional. And of course, once you've created your plan, you've talked to your helpers, you've built your support system, it's important to review, practice, and refresh everything. So talk to your support network, communicate with them, practice your plan, and make sure that you review your supplies and documents at least twice a year. So now we're going to talk about how to create a communication plan. So this is something that you'll share with your support network. It's important to plan more than one way to get in touch in case the disaster disrupts power, phone networks, or internet access. So part of this is identifying someone local to help with communication. This might be to local officials, first responders, doctors, or building managers. And also identify someone outside your local area who may be able to assist with communication when local access is disrupted. Sometimes, if there are issues, contacting people in the local area because there's a very local disaster, you might be able to get through to someone outside of the area who might be able to get through to someone else you're trying to contact. Learn how to use alternate communication methods if available. Use mobile phones to send texts. You might also use internet for emails or internet phone services if your typical communication methods are unavailable. Also, write down numbers for emergency services. I know it's very common nowadays for people to not memorize phone numbers, which is fine, but it's good to have things written down. So your utilities, service providers, medical providers, insurance companies, and your building or homeowner association, managers, home repair professionals, and other services might all be good phone numbers to write down. And part of your plan and your preparation would be preparing emergency supplies. This would be, you need 2 kits. So you need one to stay at home and one that's portable in case of an evacuation. So these might include basics like food and water, a first aid kit, maybe a flashlight or a whistle, some cash, a change of clothes, and sturdy shoes. Some other considerations might be phone chargers, batteries, and battery backup plans for all medical devices. And this is a really basic list, but you'll find that most of these items are probably already in your home and don't require purchasing. So part of this is just putting it all together. And you can find more information about creating an emergency kit on the Red Cross website, which we'll link you to at the end of this presentation. You'll also want to personalize your kit. So you'll need a backup supply of medication for 30 days or more if that's possible. You might want to include additional items like an extra pair of prescription eyewear, medical devices, or any assistive devices such as a cane. This could also include comfort items, entertainment, a book maybe. You'll also want to gather enough items for yourself and everyone in your household, and don't forget pets and service animals. Like I said before, it's good to have a lightweight kit for at least 3 days for an evacuation. And if you use a car kit, at least 24 hours in the car. And next, we're going to talk about documents. So here's some even more ways to develop your plan. So you'll want to locate important documents like a household identification, maybe an ID, social security card, driver's license, marriage license, and all these important documents should be copied and scanned. Some of these are required for recovery financial assistance, so they're very helpful to have after a disaster if you're impacted by an emergency, and take some time to learn about financial preparedness. You'll also want to gather medical information, so that would be an up-to-date list of your conditions, your allergies, medications, and dosages, also your doctors, caregivers, and health insurance cards. In addition, make copies of your written prescriptions before having them filled if you have a paper script, or ask your doctor or pharmacist for a printed copy of all your prescribed medications, because having this information on hand might make it easier to replace after a disaster. Of course, like we talked about before, keep and share a contact list of people in your support network and keep a copy of your plans. You'll also want to safeguard these documents, so if you have them printed, it's maybe good to keep them in a waterproof box or safe, to store electronic copies in a password-protected format, in a secure cloud-based file, or a removable flash drive, or you could keep them with a trusted family member. So next we're going to talk about what you can do during a disaster. So there are some concrete things you can do during an emergency or a disaster that will help you stay safe, and we'll discuss those here. So first of all, you'll want to stay informed. This would look like monitoring TV, radio, and the emergency alerts that we talked about earlier for disaster watches and warnings. If there's a watch issued, review your plan for that disaster and make any necessary changes in your activities to make sure you can quickly get to a safer place and can protect yourself. If there's a warning issued, you'll want to act immediately to follow your plan for that disaster. And we talked about before knowing how to take action to protect yourself. So during a disaster, you'll want to use those skills. If there are immediate dangers, you're going to use the response skills that you've learned to protect yourself. Also, be ready to stay at home or leave right away in case you need to evacuate. So think about before how you'll decide whether to stay or go, including who will help you decide. If the power's out for an extended time, or if you don't have adequate air conditioning in a heat wave or adequate heating during cold, consider evacuating to a more appropriate location. It's also good to think about public shelters. So the American Red Cross might open shelters if a disaster affects a large number of people or if the emergency is expected to last several days. And you should be prepared to go to a shelter if your area is without power, if police or local officials tell you to evacuate, or if your home has been severely damaged. It's really important to ask for help and to tell people what you need during a disaster. And then we're going to discuss now what protective actions you can take after a disaster or emergency to help keep you safe. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to recover from a disaster. And recovery can take longer than expected, but there are things to keep in mind during your recovery that will hopefully make it go more smoothly. Part of this is returning home safely, so monitor news from authorities and only return home when you've been told it's safe to do so. So report broken gas, water, or sewer lines or power lines to the local municipality. Make sure that you're working with trusted sources like the Red Cross or FEMA. And when you're recovering from a disaster, be aware of scams and be really cautious when you're sharing personal information. If there's evidence of structural damage to your home, you'll need to get a review by a trained inspector before you go back inside. If there's been an extended power outage, throw out food that may have been above 40 degrees for 2 hours or more. Be aware of the risk of electrocution. If there's water in the home, don't go in until you're sure the power is off at the main switch. And be very careful with generators. You want to avoid the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. So make sure your carbon monoxide detectors have a backup battery. Once you've returned after a disaster or emergency, make sure to document property damage and contact your insurance to file a claim. Follow safety precautions, make sure you're wearing the correct protective clothing, and always work with someone else when you're cleaning up for safety. This is a really good time to lean on the support network that you've built. So this is why it's important to build that network, because now after disaster, you're going to want to use it. And finally, here are some tips to give caregivers and the members of your support network. It's important for them to understand what might be expected and what they might be required to do to assist someone. It's important for caregivers and support network to be trained in first aid and CPR, and also to be there to provide additional emotional and behavioral support. And as part of your plan, it might be good to have a current picture of you or anyone in your support network. Okay, are there any questions about preparedness? You can go ahead and unmute or raise your hand if you have any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, Melissa.
Okay. Okay, I'll move on then. There'll be another. spot to ask questions. So another good resource is the Red Cross Emergency app. It can help you monitor different severe weather alerts and get alerted early. You can also connect with loved ones and help keep your loved ones safe. And you can download that at redcross.org/apps. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. So please consider taking our survey. Kimberly's going to put the link in the chat. It's completely anonymous, and it's just to see how well I'm doing, basically, how well this presentation is helping you. Are there any last questions? Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is a lot of stuff to remember, and it's really common to feel overwhelmed, but all of these resources are available on the Red Cross website at redcross.org/prepare, and the content of this presentation is available for you to download and print at home at redcross.org/olderadults, so you can revisit this information at your own pace. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, Kimberly. American Red Cross does have a virtual booth today. There's some great information in there. So if you weren't comfortable asking a question in this format, you feel free to go to their virtual booth and you can ask a question there as well. So
yeah, so we also have some flyers there on that virtual booth for specifically for people who maybe fit into the category of older adults and need some more information on how they can prepare.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you guys. Thank you so much, Melissa and Kimberly. It was a great presentation. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Our next session will begin in just 15 minutes, and that session is on skin cancer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.